Luca Guadagnino is one of the most talked about directors, for better or for worse. He gained popularity with Call Me By Your Name, and then made Suspiria. Many years later, he did Bones and All, and then last year's absolute hit, Challengers, late last year's Queer, and now After the Hunt. And with all of the thematic ideas and explorations that Guadagnino pulls into his work, I'm always interested to see what he'll do next, and After the Hunt was no different. Andrew Garfield, Julia Roberts, Ayo Edebri, in a film that tackles sexual assault in the education space, I think this was a really interesting route for Luca to go down. But my biggest problem with Guadagnino's career thus far is exemplified tenfold in this film because of the topic and the subject matter, and that is Guadagnino barely writes his own things. He takes a lot from adapted screenplays and other people's writing. When you look at what directors are doing in the modern age of where theaters and streaming are going, you see a different variety of projects. For example, Wes Anderson being a writer and director, Paul Thomas Anderson being a writer and director, Alex Garland being a writer and director, Sam Mendes, Darren Aronofsky, Yorgos Lanthimos, Denis Villeneuve, but my favorite of all, Christopher Nolan. I'm not just listing the list, these are directors that have worked on a plethora of projects, whether exclusively in theaters or a mix of theaters and streaming or strictly streaming. There are a lot of different platforms that directors can go down, and Luca Guadagnino, for how I feel like unique and interesting and pretty provocative his ideas are, has stuck to a pretty strict theater model. After the Hunt is one of those movies where I just don't think it works at all, and it's one of the first films of his that I've seen that feels like it should have just gone straight to streaming. And that's not a diss I like to throw out lightly. I genuinely think, though Luca Guadagnino's films aren't the biggest of scale all the time, Queer, for example, in my opinion, gets so ambitious in its final act, I still do think those are films that were meant or crafted to be seen on the big screen. I did not feel that at all with After the Hunt. After the Hunt follows a college professor that's forced to grapple with her own secretive past after one of her colleagues is faced with a serious accusation. This film made its world premiere at the Venice Film Festival. I got to see it a day or two before its US premiere at the New York Film Festival. And the press around this movie has been really interesting. Obviously, there have been some really weird viral moments about really interviewers completely disrespecting Ayo Edebri, and then also just the insensitivity of bringing up things like the Me Too movement in the wrong way.
The question was for Julia and Andrew. Now that the Me Too era and the Black Lives Matter are done, what we have to expect in Hollywood, and what we lost if we lost something with the politically correct era.
I mean, this is blatantly a very political film, and even in my notes, which by the way, I took notes for this movie and didn't even try to concise it down for a YouTube video. I'm just gonna try to go off this specifically. One of the main things I wrote down about this film was the fact that the commentary feels so on the nose from the very first scene of the film. You know exactly where this movie is going, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I just found that to be a very big stretch from where Guadagnino's work has gone in the past. I'm not going to just compare this one for one to his other projects, because on a thematic level, this is discussing something much more serious in my opinion, and that is specifically like the Me Too movement and also power dynamics between students and professors, especially at high-yielding universities. And I think thematically it is striving for a lot, but it gets so muddled down and by the end becomes so uninteresting, and interesting for the wrong reasons, I guess. I think Julia Roberts' character is one that I just found no joy in trying to understand. I think the biggest problem is so many of these characters are so irredeemable, and that's not to say that every movie has to have the perfect protagonist of sorts, but I do find that when there's nothing to grasp onto at all whatsoever, I really have a hard time getting into a film. When anyone tries to describe this film as being monumental and an achievement for the commentary and thematic ideas, I don't really understand what they're talking about, because there is nothing of substance within this commentary. It is provocative, and I get that that is Luca Guadagnino's bread and butter, but with this thematic idea, there is nothing that's funny or interesting about being provocative. I think the film just does so many subtly provocative things throughout the entire runtime that by the time you get to the end, they have to make such a baffling character decision. And Julia Roberts' character, instantly, and I think for most of the movie, she is playing okay enough middle ground. Like, she is pandering on the Me Too side of things of like, though she might believe the man, it's a woman and she knows her career might be if she doesn't side with the woman. And so there's a bunch of different dynamics, and I will get to those in a second here because I thought that was actually a really interesting aspect of the film. But in the final act, or even moments, 15 minutes of this movie, they make such a dumb bullshit decision that her character basically just explains her entire like life and problem and that thing that she was grappling with. None of it's left up for interpretation, by the way. She's just stating it to you. She says it all, and it instantly makes you just hate her. And it makes you like the one character that the whole time the movie felt like it was trying to make you hate. The final negative thing I'll say about this film is I genuinely think this is one of the worst representations of my generation and just politics in the scope of 2025 / like the modern idea of how the public views sexual assault allegations, especially towards like a white man in power. I just don't think they execute well on it at all whatsoever. Like, it's pretty baffling the way that they're able to up at every single point that they get to. Again, not to say I think one character is more innocent than another. I don't think that's what the film is trying to do, but they never dive deep enough into one aspect of trying to care about a character. Like, they just make everyone a bad person. That's pretty much it for my primary negatives of the film. I do want to circle back to the Luca stuff in just a second here, but I do have to mention the acting because there is one major negative. But on the positives, Andrew Garfield and Julia Roberts are absolutely amazing. There's a scene between them in the diner where Andrew Garfield is first talking to her about the sexual assault allegations, and I found that to be such an interesting sequence. You can tell really the nervousness about just the topic of conversation. That is easily the best written and best representation of this type of moment, in my opinion. It's such a scary thing, and like, no one ever even wants to imagine that conversation, but it's a conversation that has to be had and has been had. And so I think they just execute on that so well, and a big part of that is Andrew Garfield is just amazing. But on the other side of things, I am starting to more and more just think that Ayo Edebri can't really act. I haven't seen all of Opus. I've seen a good chunk of it. I don't really like her in that film. I just don't really like that film in general. I think she's really good in a voice acting role in Inside Out 2. And in The Bear, it just doesn't feel like she's playing a character, or I think I've just been watching that show for so long that I really only see her as Sydney from The Bear. But I think in this movie, none of the emotional beats hit. There's like one scene that's in the trailer where she's like sitting really cold, shivered up, and talking to Julia Roberts' character for the first time about this situation. And that entire scene just like absolutely sucks. She is not able to keep up with Julia Roberts at all whatsoever. In my opinion, I think everyone will view it differently, whether it depends how invested you are into the story, how good the actual writing is. Technically though, this movie is really, really great. If I'm not mistaken, it's shot on 35mm film, and Trent and Atticus Reznor, I believe 9 Inch Nails, they also did the score, and this score is insanely different than anything that they've ever done in their career, and it is really, really good. Like, it's not as amazing as Challengers, it's not as amazing as Tron Ares, but they're really pulling together like a weird, not social network, but like kind of like high class university rich people score. Like, I don't know how to describe a score like that, but it's so much different than something you think with their name attached to it. And I really respect them for taking that swing. Circling back to Luca, I think is where this film has the most interesting discussion, because again, After the Hunt is so thematically interesting on a baseline level, they never go anywhere with it. And even Queer, it's from a novel. Even Challengers, he didn't write that. I mean, Luca really hasn't written since his like first 3 films, and I find that to be a really interesting point of a lot of his recent work. I mean, since he gained mass popularity after Call Me By Your Name. Like I said at the top of this video though, like a lot of the directors that I really like and that are consistently putting out phenomenal work in the 2020s thus far, they are all writing and primarily writing and directing their own work. At the end of last year, we were getting heavy rumors that Luca Guadagnino was going to get on board with DC Studios to make a Sergeant Rock movie written by the guy who did Challengers and starring Daniel Craig at first, and then it got confirmed it was going to be Colin Farrell. And Challengers, in my opinion, is by far Luca's best film. That writer coming back, I would love that pairing. Luca's not attached to that anymore, and almost all of his upcoming projects he is just not a writer for, and it's kind of scary to me. Artificial, which is a biopic about the OpenAI 2023 crisis starring Andrew Garfield, a new adaptation of the Bret Easton Ellis novel American Psycho starring Austin Butler, and then he's also apparently going to direct Separate Rooms, which is an adaptation of another novel. Maybe it's just me, but I think I found the common denominator here. At times it feels like a crutch to me if I feel like Luca had more of a say in the writer's room with a project like After the Hunt, or he got to pick consistently a better writer. This film specifically just could have been so much more interesting. Like, the bones are there. There is something, I think, at the core of this film that would work, but at the end of the day, After the Hunt just feels flat. It feels provocative to be provocative with a subject matter that I think has so much more deeper to it than just he's right and she's wrong. Luca Guadagnino's After the Hunt, I'm going to give it a 2 out of 5. If you've seen or watched this movie, let me know what you thought of it in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Peace.